The sun beat down on the clearing as Marco and Lorenzo circled each other, swords glinting. Dust swirled around their worn leather boots, kicked up by their tense movements. Years of simmering animosity had finally boiled over into this, a duel to the death. Marco, lean and agile, feinted left, his blade a silver blur. Lorenzo, broader and more powerfully built, met the attack with a resounding clang. Sparks flew as steel met steel. Their faces were grim masks of concentration, sweat plastering their dark hair to their foreheads. This wasn't just a friendly sparring match. This was a fight fueled by years of resentment. Some whispered it was about a woman, stolen affections leaving a wound that never healed. Others claimed it was a matter of honor, a perceived slight escalating into a blood feud between their families. Whatever the root cause, the hatred between Marco and Lorenzo was as sharp and deadly as the blades they wielded. Lorenzo roared, pressing the attack. He forced Marco back, his superior strength evident in each blow. Marco parried desperately, his movements becoming more frantic. He knew he couldn't withstand Lorenzo's onslaught forever. He needed an opening, a moment of weakness to exploit. Each strike was a testament to years of training. They moved with a deadly grace, honed by countless hours spent practicing their art. The air crackled with tension, the only sounds the rhythmic clash of steel and their ragged breathing. This duel was more than just a fight. It was a culmination of their lives, a final reckoning between two men consumed by rivalry. The clearing was known as Widow's Glade, a patch of flattened earth surrounded by ancient, gnarled trees. Local legend said a heartbroken woman had taken her own life there centuries ago, forever staining the ground with sorrow. It was a fitting place for a duel, a place where old wounds festered and grudges were settled in blood. Just beyond the tree-line, the village of Oakhaven nestled in the valley. The faint sounds of children playing and the distant clanging of the blacksmith's hammer were carried on the breeze, a stark contrast to the deadly silence within the glade. Marco and Lorenzo had chosen this place specifically for its isolation, far from prying eyes and the reach of the village elders who might try to intervene. The feud between the two men was a tapestry woven with threads of love, honor, and betrayal. It began with Isabella, a woman whose beauty was matched only by her spirit. Both Marco and Lorenzo had sought her hand, their friendship fracturing under the strain of their shared desire. Isabella had ultimately chosen Marco, but Lorenzo never forgave him, convinced that Marco had used underhanded tactics to win her over. Then there was the matter of the stolen map. Lorenzo accused Marco of stealing a valuable map detailing a hidden silver mine, a map that Lorenzo claimed was his birthright. Marco vehemently denied the accusation, claiming Lorenzo had simply lost it through carelessness. The truth, like the location of the mine, remained buried, fueling the flames of their animosity. The air itself seemed thick with unspoken accusations and simmering resentment. This place was their stage, and blood would be the final act. Elena, her face flushed with the heat of the day and the weight of her unborn child, trudged along the overgrown path. Heavily pregnant and nearing her due date, every step was an effort. She was eager to get home, to the cool shade of her small cottage and the comforting presence of her mother. Normally, Elena would have taken a longer, safer route around Widow's Glade. But today, a sudden craving for the elderflower cordial her mother made had compelled her to brave the shortcut. She hoped to surprise her with a visit. The path, though shorter, was uneven and rarely used, making the journey difficult. As she neared the edge of the clearing, a sharp pain gripped her abdomen. She gasped, clutching her swollen belly. Another pain followed, stronger this time. Panic flared in her chest. She knew what was happening. The baby was coming, and she was alone. She stumbled forward, desperate to reach the village, but her legs felt like lead. A wave of dizziness washed over her, and she could no longer support her weight. With a cry of distress, Elena collapsed at the edge of Widow's Glade, just within earshot of the dueling men. The labor pains intensified, each one more excruciating than the last. She was trapped, helpless, and about to bring new life into a world consumed by a deadly feud. Her muffled cries for help were almost lost in the clash of steel. The shortcut had become a perilous trap. The ringing of steel abruptly ceased. Marco, panting heavily, lowered his sword slightly. Lorenzo, a sneer still etched on his face, followed suit. A new sound had pierced the air, a sound that cut through their hatred like a knife. A woman's cry of pain. What was that? Marco asked, his brow furrowed. Lorenzo, ever the cynic, scoffed. Probably just some animal caught in a trap. Pay it no mind. He raised his sword again, eager to resume the duel. Let's finish this. But the cries continued, growing more desperate. It was unmistakably a human voice, filled with agony. Marco's grip on his sword loosened. He recognized the sound. His sister had sounded similar, giving birth to her first child. That's no animal, Lorenzo, Marco insisted, his gaze fixed on the tree-lean. That's a woman in distress. Lorenzo hesitated. He wanted to dismiss it, to ignore the interruption and claim his victory. But the cries were persistent, impossible to ignore. A flicker of something akin to concern crossed his face, quickly masked by his usual disdain. They stood there, frozen in a moment of profound conflict. The duel, the years of hatred, the burning desire for revenge, all seemed insignificant in the face of the raw, primal sound of a woman in labor. The choice before them was clear: continue their fight to the death, or answer the desperate plea for help. The decision hung heavy in the air, a silent battle waged within their own hearts. Would they remain enemies, or could they find a shared humanity in this unexpected crisis? Lorenzo's jaw tightened. "This is a trick," he spat, his voice laced with suspicion. "She's probably a friend of yours. Marco, trying to distract me. Don't fall for it." He gripped his sword tighter, his knuckles white. Lorenzo had a reputation for ruthlessness, a willingness to do whatever it took to achieve his goals. He saw this interruption as a weakness, an attempt to rob him of his rightful victory. To him, finishing the duel was paramount. Marco, however, couldn't shake the genuine distress in the woman's cries. "That's absurd, Lorenzo," he retorted, his voice sharp. "Even you can't believe that. A woman is clearly in pain. We have to help her." He lowered his sword completely, a clear signal of his intentions. The competitive fire that had burned so brightly moments ago was now replaced by concern. "Help her!" Lorenzo scoffed, his eyes blazing with anger. "Are you serious? We're in the middle of a duel. This is our chance to settle things once and for all. Are you really willing to throw it all away for some stranger?" He gestured dismissively towards the tree-lean. Marco's expression hardened. "This isn't about the duel anymore, Lorenzo. This is about doing what's right. I won't stand here and ignore someone in need, especially a woman about to give birth." He took a step towards the sound of the cries, his resolve unwavering. The contrast between the two men was stark. Lorenzo, focused solely on his own desires, and Marco, moved by compassion and a sense of duty. A memory flashed through Marco's mind, a stark contrast to the violence of the duel. He was a boy, no older than 10, kneeling beside a small, injured bird. Its wing was bent at an unnatural angle, its tiny body trembling. The other village boys had laughed, urging him to leave it, to let nature take its course. But Marco couldn't. He gently scooped up the bird, his heart aching with sympathy. He took it home, ignoring his chores and the scolding he knew was coming. He fashioned a makeshift splint from twigs and cloth, carefully binding the broken wing. For days, he tended to the bird, feeding it crumbs of bread and water, whispering words of encouragement. He remembered the feeling of triumph when, weeks later, the bird finally took flight, soaring into the sky with newfound strength. It was a small act of kindness, easily forgotten, but it stayed with him, a reminder of the importance of compassion. The memory faded, returning him to the present, to the cries of the woman in distress. The image of the helpless bird solidified his resolve. He couldn't stand by and do nothing, not when someone needed his help. Lorenzo might see it as weakness, but Marco knew it was strength, the strength to choose compassion over hatred, life over death. The duel, the rivalry, all paled in comparison to the simple act of helping someone in need. It was in his nature, woven into the fabric of his being. Elena's cries escalated, no longer muffled whimpers, but raw, guttural screams that echoed through the clearing. The intervals between the cries shortened, each one more intense than the last. It was clear to both men that this was no false alarm. She was in dire straits. Marco, his face etched with concern, took another step towards the treeline. "Lorenzo, she needs help now. We can't just stand here." He could hear the desperation in her voice, the primal fear that accompanied the throes of childbirth. He knew that every second counted. Lorenzo remained rooted to the spot, his expression a mixture of anger and unease. He could see the genuine worry in Marco's eyes, and a seed of doubt began to sprout in his own mind. Was he truly willing to let a woman suffer, possibly die, just to settle an old score? Another piercing scream tore through the air, followed by a series of ragged gasps. It was clear that Elena was nearing the final stages of labor. Without immediate assistance, both she and the baby could be in danger. The realization struck Lorenzo with the force of a blow. This was no longer an abstract problem. It was a life-or-death situation unfolding before his very eyes. The urgency of the situation was undeniable. The time for hesitation was over. Without another word, Marco made his decision. He tossed his sword onto the ground, the metallic clang echoing in the sudden silence. The act was a clear declaration. The duel was over, at least for now. He turned and sprinted towards the treeline, his boots pounding against the earth. Lorenzo watched him go, a storm of emotions swirling within him. Anger, confusion, and a reluctant respect warred for dominance. He couldn't believe Marco would abandon their fight, would sacrifice his honor for a stranger. But he also couldn't deny the conviction in Marco's eyes, the unwavering determination to help. Marco burst through the trees, his eyes scanning the undergrowth. He spotted Elena almost immediately, lying on the ground, her face contorted in pain. He knelt beside her, his voice filled with concern. "Elena, are you all right? What can I do?" Elena gasped, her eyes wide with fear and relief. "Help me, please, the baby." She clutched his hand tightly, her grip surprisingly strong. Marco, despite his lack of experience with childbirth, tried to remain calm. He knew he had to think clearly, to do whatever he could to ease her suffering. "It's going to be all right," he said, his voice soothing. "I'm here. I'll help you." He looked around, searching for anything that could be of use. The duel was forgotten, the rivalry set aside. His only focus was on Elena and the life she was about to bring into the world. The warrior was now a caregiver, driven by instinct and compassion. Lorenzo stood alone in the clearing, his sword still clutched in his hand. He glared at the spot where Marco had discarded his weapon, his chest heaving with a mixture of anger and disbelief. "Coward!" he roared, his voice echoing through the trees. "He runs away when the fight gets tough, just like he always does." But even as the words left his mouth, they rang hollow. He knew, deep down, that Marco hadn't run away from a fight. He had run towards something more important, something that Lorenzo, in his pride and bitterness, had failed to see. Elena's cries, now clearer and more desperate, continued to pierce the air. They tugged at something within Lorenzo, something he had tried to bury beneath layers of resentment and anger. He pictured his own mother, his own sister, going through the same ordeal. Could he truly stand idly by while a woman suffered, while a new life struggled to enter the world? He looked from Marco's discarded sword to the treeline, then back again. The internal battle raged within him. Honor demanded he finish the duel, that he avenge the perceived wrongs of the past. But something else, something deeper and more profound, urged him to act, to help, to show a sliver of humanity. He hesitated, torn between his ingrained sense of rivalry and the undeniable pull of compassion. The fury remained, but it was now tempered with a growing sense of conflict. The ruthless Lorenzo was beginning to crack. Marco, kneeling beside Elena, felt a surge of helplessness. He had faced down seasoned warriors, stared death in the face countless times, but this was different. He was utterly unprepared. All he knew about childbirth came from overheard conversations and fleeting glimpses of his sister's experiences. He tried to recall anything useful. "Breathe, Elena, breathe," he urged, mimicking the instructions he remembered hearing. Deep breaths, in and out. He wiped the sweat from her brow with the edge of his tunic, his hands surprisingly gentle. He looked around frantically, searching for anything that could provide comfort or assistance. He gathered some soft leaves and moss to create a makeshift cushion beneath her head. He tore strips from his own shirt to use as clean cloths. He knew it wasn't much, but it was all he could think of. "Push, Elena, when you feel the urge," he instructed, his voice trembling slightly. "Push as hard as you can." He had no idea if he was saying the right things, but he hoped his calm demeanor would provide some measure of comfort. He could see the pain etched on her face, the sheer effort she was exerting. He held her hand tightly, offering what little strength he possessed. He was a warrior, not a midwife, but he was determined to do everything in his power to help Elena bring her child safely into the world. He was relying on instinct, on compassion, and on the hope that somehow he could make a difference. His lack of experience was terrifying, but his commitment was absolute. Lorenzo stood frozen for what felt like an eternity, the weight of his sword heavy in his hand. He could hear Marco's voice, strained but steady, offering encouragement to Elena. He could still hear Elena's cries, but now they were punctuated by Marco's words of support. Finally, with a sigh that seemed to release years of pent-up anger and resentment, Lorenzo made his decision. He slowly, deliberately sheathed his sword. The click of the blade locking into place echoed through the clearing, a symbol of his surrender, not to Marco, but to his own conscience. He may not like Marco. He may still harbor bitterness over Isabella and the stolen map, but he couldn't, in good conscience, abandon a woman in need. He had always prided himself on being a man of honor, even if that honor was often twisted and self-serving. But this was different. This was about basic human decency. He started towards the tree-line, his steps hesitant at first, then more determined. He wasn't sure what he could do to help. He knew even less about childbirth than Marco did. But he couldn't stand by and do nothing. He might be a rival, an enemy, but he wasn't a monster. The last vestiges of his anger faded, replaced by a grudging respect for Marco and a growing sense of responsibility. He was about to enter a world he knew nothing about, but he was ready to face it, not as a duelist, but as a man. Lorenzo approached Elena cautiously, his face a mask of awkwardness. He knelt beside Marco, careful to maintain a respectful distance. The air crackled with unspoken tension, the lingering animosity a palpable presence. "What do you need me to do?" Lorenzo asked, his voice gruff. He avoided eye contact with Marco, focusing instead on Elena's pale face. Marco, surprised but grateful for the assistance, quickly assessed the situation. "We need more light. And clean water, if you can find some." Lorenzo nodded and disappeared back into the trees, returning moments later with a handful of broad leaves filled with rainwater. He also managed to gather some dry branches, which he carefully arranged into a small fire, casting a warm glow on the scene. Working together, they were a study in contrasts. Marco, gentle and reassuring, held Elena's hand and offered words of encouragement. Lorenzo, practical and efficient, tended to the fire and kept a watchful eye on Elena's condition. Their movements were stiff and awkward, their interactions minimal, but their shared purpose was undeniable. There were moments of friction, small disagreements on the best course of action. The old resentments simmered beneath the surface, threatening to erupt. But each time, they managed to suppress their animosity, reminding themselves that Elena's well-being was paramount. They were two rivals, forced to cooperate in the face of an extraordinary circumstance, bound together by a shared humanity and a desperate desire to help. The duel was long forgotten, replaced by the shared struggle of bringing a new life into the world. The hours that followed were a blur of pain, exhaustion, and unwavering determination. Elena's labor was long and arduous. There were moments when she seemed to teeter on the brink of collapse, her strength waning with each contraction. Marco and Lorenzo worked tirelessly, their initial awkwardness replaced by a focused intensity. Marco continued to offer words of encouragement, wiping her brow and holding her hand. Lorenzo, surprisingly adept, kept the fire burning brightly and ensured a constant supply of clean water. He even fashioned a makeshift support for her back, using rolled-up clothing. The silence was broken only by Elena's cries, Marco's soothing reassurances, and Lorenzo's quiet instructions. The tension in the air was thick, a mixture of fear and hope. Both men knew that they were facing a life-or-death situation, and they were doing everything in their power to ensure a positive outcome. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, a new sound filled the clearing. A baby's cry, weak at first, then growing stronger with each breath. Relief washed over Marco and Lorenzo, a wave of emotion so powerful it left them both speechless. They looked at each other, a flicker of understanding passing between them. They had done it. They had helped bring a new life into the world. Elena lay back, exhausted but radiant, a small bundle cradled in her arms. The difficult birth was over. A healthy baby had been born. Marco and Lorenzo stood side by side, their bodies aching with exhaustion. Sweat plastered their hair to their foreheads, and streaks of dirt and blood marred their faces and clothing. Some of the blood was from the earlier duel, a stark reminder of the hatred that had consumed them just hours before. The rest was a testament to the miracle they had just witnessed. Elena stirred slightly, and they both turned their attention to the small bundle in her arms. The baby, wrapped in strips of Marco's torn shirt, was sleeping peacefully, its tiny face serene and untroubled. Marco reached out a hesitant hand, then quickly withdrew it, unsure if he was worthy to touch something so pure. Lorenzo, his face softened by an uncharacteristic tenderness, simply stared, his eyes filled with a mixture of awe and disbelief. They were warriors, hardened by years of training and battle. They had seen death and destruction firsthand, but neither of them had ever experienced anything like this. The birth of a child, the creation of new life, was a force more powerful than any sword, more profound than any rivalry. They looked at each other again, their eyes meeting for the first time without animosity. They saw not enemies, but fellow witnesses to a miracle. They saw not rivals, but two men forever bound by this shared experience. The baby stirred again, letting out a soft whimper. Both Marco and Lorenzo felt a pang of protectiveness, a sudden and unexpected desire to shield this tiny creature from the harsh realities of the world. They were changed men, forever marked by the events of this extraordinary day. Elena, her voice weak but filled with genuine gratitude, looked up at Marco and Lorenzo. The firelight danced in her eyes, reflecting the warmth that now filled the clearing. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Both of you. I don't know what I would have done without you." She paused, taking a deep breath. "I will never forget this." Her words hung in the air, a simple expression of thanks that carried a profound weight. Marco and Lorenzo, humbled by her gratitude, simply nodded, unable to find the words to express their own emotions. "You were both so brave," Elena continued, her gaze shifting from one man to the other. "To put aside your differences, to help me. It means more than you can know." She gently stroked the baby's head, her face radiating with love and contentment. "You saved us both." Marco and Lorenzo exchanged glances, a silent acknowledgement of the truth in her words. They had come to Widow's Glade to settle a score, to engage in a deadly duel fueled by years of hatred. Instead, they had been given the opportunity to witness a miracle, to participate in the creation of new life. And in doing so, they had discovered a shared humanity that transcended their rivalry. Elena's gratitude was a powerful reminder of the transformative power of compassion and the enduring strength of the human spirit. The thanks were simple, but the impact was immense. The weight of the years of animosity that had separated Marco and Lorenzo began to lift. The miracle they had witnessed, the shared experience of bringing a new life into the world, had irrevocably altered them. The intensity of their rivalry, once a consuming fire, now flickered like a dying ember. The reasons for their feud seemed petty and insignificant in the face of the profound event they had just shared. The stolen map, the love triangle with Isabella, all faded into insignificance, dwarfed by the sheer magnitude of the birth. Marco felt a sense of lightness he hadn't experienced in years. The burden of hatred, the constant need to prove himself, had vanished, replaced by a quiet sense of peace. He looked at Lorenzo, not with anger or resentment, but with a newfound respect. They had been enemies, but they had also been brothers in arms, united by a common purpose. Lorenzo, too, felt a shift within him. The bitterness that had poisoned his heart for so long began to dissipate, replaced by a grudging admiration for Marco's compassion and a newfound appreciation for the sanctity of life. He realized that his pride and anger had blinded him to the true meaning of honor. It wasn't about winning a duel or avenging a perceived wrong. It was about helping those in need, about choosing compassion over hatred. The rivalry still existed, but it was no longer the defining force in their lives. The miracle they had witnessed had planted a seed of understanding, a glimmer of hope for a future free from the shackles of the past. Lorenzo cleared his throat, breaking the comfortable silence that had settled over the clearing. He shifted his weight, avoiding Marco's gaze. It was difficult to admit he had been wrong, to acknowledge the pettiness of the feud that had consumed him for so long. But he knew it was necessary. "Marco," he said, his voice rough but sincere, I was a fool. All this time, all this hatred, it was pointless." He paused, searching for the right words. This was more important. He gestured towards Elena and the baby. He took a deep breath and finally met Marco's gaze. "I offer you truce. Let's put an end to this childish rivalry. Let's leave the past behind us." He extended his hand, his expression a mixture of humility and hope. "It won't be easy," he added, a hint of his old cynicism creeping back into his voice. "We've been enemies for too long, but I think we can try. For Elena, and for the little one." He kept his hand outstretched, waiting for Marco's response. He knew that his offer was a gamble, that Marco could easily reject it and reignite the feud. But he also knew that something had changed between them, that the shared experience of the birth had forged a bond that couldn't be easily broken. He was offering a chance at peace, a chance at redemption. It was up to Marco to decide whether to accept it. He was humbled, acknowledging his mistakes and extending an olive branch. A slow smile spread across Marco's face. He looked at Lorenzo's outstretched hand, then back at Elena and the sleeping baby. He knew, in that moment, that Lorenzo was sincere. The years of hatred, the burning desire for revenge, had finally been extinguished by the miracle of new life. He reached out and clasped Lorenzo's hand, his grip firm and steady. "I accept your truce, Lorenzo," he said, his voice filled with genuine warmth. "It's time to let go of the past." He squeezed Lorenzo's hand, then released it. "There are more important things in life than winning a duel," he added, his gaze fixed on the baby. "More important than pride, more important than revenge. There's family, community, and helping those in need." He looked at Elena, his heart filled with gratitude and respect. "You've shown us both what truly matters, Elena. Thank you." He realized that the duel, the rivalry, had been a distraction from what was truly important. He had been so focused on proving himself, on avenging perceived wrongs, that he had lost sight of the simple joys of life: friendship, compassion, and the bonds of community. The experience had opened his eyes, revealing a new path, a path leading towards peace and understanding. He was ready to embrace it. The need to win had faded, replaced by the desire to heal. As the first rays of dawn painted the sky with hues of pink and gold, Marco and Lorenzo helped Elena to her feet. She was still weak, but her eyes shone with newfound strength. The baby, nestled securely in her arms, slept soundly, oblivious to the events that had unfolded. They carefully made their way back towards the village, Marco walking on one side of Elena, Lorenzo on the other, their presence a silent promise of protection. Their swords lay forgotten on the dueling ground, symbols of a past they had chosen to leave behind. The path back to Oakhaven was slow and arduous, but they persevered, their shared purpose giving them strength. As they neared the village, they could hear the sounds of life stirring, the clucking of chickens, the barking of dogs, the distant laughter of children. It was a welcome sound, a reminder of the community they were returning to, a community they had almost destroyed with their hatred. The future was uncertain. There would be challenges to overcome, old habits to break. The scars of the past would not disappear overnight. But the possibility of friendship now existed, a fragile seed planted in the fertile ground of compassion and understanding. They were no longer enemies, but fellow villagers, bound together by a shared experience and a commitment to building a better future. The road ahead was long, but they would face it together, not as rivals, but as men. The story ends with a sense of hope, of a new beginning. Years later, the story of the duel at Widow's Glade became a legend in Oakhaven, a tale whispered around crackling fires on cold winter nights. It was a story of hatred and violence, but also a story of compassion and redemption. And the baby, the child whose birth had sparked such a profound transformation, grew up knowing the story well. Some say she was named Marcella Lorenza, a combination of both Marco and Lorenzo's names, a constant reminder of the unexpected bond that had formed between the two former rivals. Others claim she was simply named Elena, after her mother, a tribute to the woman whose courage and strength had brought them all together. But whatever her name, she carried the legacy of that extraordinary day within her, a symbol of hope and the enduring power of the human spirit. Perhaps, as she grew, she would ask about the men who had helped bring her into the world, about the rivalry that had once consumed them, about the miracle that had transformed them. And the village of Oakhaven, forever changed by the events at Widow's Glade, learned the true meaning of community, of forgiveness, and of the enduring power of love. The end.